Welcome, everybody. My name is Catherine, and I'm a committee member of Cancer Support Community, and I'm also a research assistant at Northwest Medical Specialties. We're very excited to have you here tonight on a very important topic presented by Brianna Cross-Bean, attorney at law. I wanted to give you some information about Cancer Support Community. It's the largest worldwide nonprofit organization, and it's for anybody affected by cancer, whether you're a patient, a survivor, a healthcare worker. This program is open for everybody. And it's through this program that we're able to offer so many great educational workshops and presentations such as this one. And we have support groups, social events, and health topics that we hope everyone enjoys. Some housekeeping rules that we have for today is that this workshop will be recorded, so you can decide whether you have your camera on or off today. Please stay muted throughout the presentation to prevent having any background noise. But if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to pop it in the chat box, and we will have someone monitoring the chat. And we also have allotted time to ask Brianna any of your questions at the end of the presentation. Last but not least, we will also have a raffle at the end of the presentation, and everyone who is here tonight will be entered into the raffle for a gift card. To help us out a little bit, please check your name on your Zoom screen to double check that's the name that you registered with. And for the best viewing option for this presentation, please click on speaker option. That way you can see both the speaker and the presentation. And in a couple days, this workshop will be uploaded to the Northwest Medical Specialties YouTube page for you to reference if you would like to check back and see if you missed anything or if there's something that you want to go over. And Eunice will be emailing you the PowerPoint slides as well as the recording link of this workshop to the email that you signed up with. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Brianna.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending today. My name is attorney Brianna Cross-Bean, and I am going to be presenting on long-term care planning essentials. Now, just a heads up, there's going to be a lot of information in this. I have provided Eunice my slides, and this is being recorded. So if you guys want to go back and reference, you definitely can. So let me just tell you a little bit about myself and get the screen to go. Let's see, I have to be smarter than this, sorry. I know what's going on. There we go. Okay, so I'm a solo practice attorney. I've been in practice since 2013. My primary practice areas are estate planning, elder law, and probate. And I'm sure you guys can imagine that those three areas really overlap quite a bit, especially in this kind of planning. So I have two office locations. My primary office is in Puyallup. I am very close to Tacoma Boys and Costco in South Hill. And I do have a satellite office in Gig Harbor that I am at on Wednesdays. My office location is actually changing a little bit, or I'm changing to a different location in Gig Harbor as of June 1st, just because the woman I'm renting from is changing locations, and she asked if I wanted to come with her. So I absolutely did. My contact information is below. You can reach me either via phone or email. Right now, let's talk about kind of some basic overview of long-term care facts, and then we'll dig into the meat of Medicaid and VA benefits, and then we'll also talk about some ways to preserve and plan at that point. But I think we have to lay the groundwork first, so it'll make those planning techniques make a lot more sense. Now, long-term care, what is it? It is a very broad term that includes everything from assisted living, adult family homes, nursing home care, home care. Now, with long-term care, the great majority of adults will end up needing some form of long-term care during their lifetime. And there was a statistic, this is now starting to get kind of old, back from 2015. I don't know if we've had any updates, if anything, the percentage has increased, that 70% of all adults will need some form of long-term care. And to me, that illustrates that it is a probability rather than a possibility. So it's really good to educate yourself as much as you can, as early as you can, so you are not in crisis when you have to go into long-term care. The average monthly cost of long-term care is about $6,000. That is astronomically expensive, and it really, really catches a lot of people off guard until they actually have to go through it, or they have a family member who has to go through it. The monthly cost range is $1,500 to about $15,000. Nowadays, I'm seeing $1,500, not very much. I'm starting to see $10,000 to $15,000, a little bit more, especially in regards to memory care. Most facilities do have a 1 to 4 year private pay requirement, and that'll affect Medicaid, which I'll talk about in a bit. But realize that most facilities do expect you to pay full price out of pocket for a few years before they will accept government benefits. There are 4 main ways to pay for long-term care. One is private pay. That's kind of obvious. That means just paying directly out of pocket. You can also pay for it via long-term care insurance. The next way is Medicaid/COPES. And then finally, there's a type of VA benefit that will pay for some of the care. All right. Now, even though I'm mentioning the majority of adults will end up they'll need some form of long-term care during their lifetime, most people want to stave that off as long as possible. One of the best ways to do it is to stay healthy and stay on your feet, and to reduce your risk of falling. So older and disabled adults are at increased risk of falls. There are many ways to help reduce falls. You can use grab bars, clear the walkways, wheelchair ramps, shower seats, etc. Unfortunately, I've seen this time and time again where, an older adult will be living at home. They are perfectly healthy, doing fine. They will have one fall, and it will start this horrible cascade of health issues, and they'll end up landing in a long-term care facility before they wanted to. So it's really, really important that you stay safe at home. So this is a fall safety checklist. This is from the CDC website, and this is one of my favorite resources from there, because it has some really good, just practical tips about how to keep your home safe. Not necessarily expensive or anything, but this gives you ideas for how to walk through your house and be sure things are as safe as possible. Right. Now, when you do start needing long-term care, what does kind of paying for that look like? Oh, and I know I don't have a slide on long-term care insurance. I'm going to deviate to that slightly. Long-term care insurance, I know, is really expensive nowadays, and insurance companies like to increase it, increase the premiums, especially as you get older. As much as you can, be sure, if you have a policy, especially if you're getting older, keep on paying the premiums. I have seen so many times where someone will come into me for long-term care planning advice, and I'll ask them if they have long-term care insurance. They'll say, oh, I used to, but the premiums got too high, so I canceled it about 2 years ago. And for some reason, it seems like 2 years is when people are 2 years before they need long-term care is when people, if they're going to stop paying their premiums, stop paying their premiums. Now, this is just my personal opinion, but I am pretty darn sure that long-term care insurance companies do this intentionally so that people will drop their premiums and stop paying, and then the insurance company won't have to pay out. So if you happen to have long-term care insurance, try to hang on to it as long as you can. It will really set you up better for not having to exhaust all of your resources. So moving on to Medicare and Medicaid. So Medicare and Medicaid, the two benefit programs sound really similar, but they are quite different. So Medicare is the government program that pays for essentially traditional health insurance type coverage, doctor's visits, hospitalizations, medications, things like that. It is not a means of paying for long-term care. It covers, in fact, very little long-term care, 30 to 90 days max. Keep in mind that the majority of people who need long-term care, I think the average that they'll need it is 2 to 3 years. So that, even best case scenario, 90 days, that's still a drop in the bucket from what you will actually need. Now, Medicare is great for a number of things, and I really encourage anyone who is on it to make use of it. You have paid into it, use as many of the benefits as you're eligible for. It does cover hospice and inpatient rehab. Now, with hospice, it covers a good amount, but typically it doesn't cover all. It won't cover 24-hour care, but make use of the benefits as much as you can. Now, there's a very important distinction between inpatient versus under observation. Let's say that someone falls and hits their head, for instance, and they get rushed to the emergency room. Now, it's really important that whoever is advocating for that, ideally under a durable power of attorney, make sure that their loved one gets inpatient classification in the hospital. If you get inpatient classification, then if the individual needs to go to inpatient rehab, physical therapy, occupational therapy, then Medicare will cover that. If they are merely in under observation, then Medicare will not cover any inpatient rehab. So it's really important to be sure that you or your loved one is classified appropriately. Inpatient rehab tends to be a lot more expensive than on average than typical long-term care. You're easily looking at $12,000 to, I would say, $20,000 per month, which is just, most people can't afford to pay for that for very long. All right, then moving on to Medicaid. So there are two types or two general categories of Medicaid. The first type is traditional health insurance for low-income individuals under age 65. So when someone is low income and they are over 65, they transition on to some Medicare plan. They're not on Medicaid anymore. Now, the type of Medicaid that I'll be referencing for the rest of this presentation applies to people who need long-term care. You don't necessarily need to be under age 65, but you do, or excuse me, you don't need to be over age 65, but you do need to qualify for long-term care. Right, so there are two main types of Medicaid for long-term care, and I am going to use them interchangeably only because their qualification requirements are roughly the same and you use the same application. So there's traditional Medicaid for nursing home care, and then there's something called COPES. That stands for Community Options Program Entry System. And this is for assistance with activities of daily living. Most people who need long-term care will end up being in an assisted living or adult family home, at least initially. So they'll typically go in under COPES, and it's not until closer to death that they would transition onto nursing home care. Now, Medicaid is very tricky. You must meet medical and financial eligibility requirements. And there are two components of financial eligibility: income and resources. Right, let's talk. Excuse me. Let's talk about what that looks like. So medical eligibility. This is typically one of the easier requirements to meet. You must need medical care that long-term care facilities provide. More specifically, at a minimum, you need assistance with at least 2 activities of daily living. So examples of that: bathing, using the restroom, walking, transferring, things like that. If I use the acronym ADL, I'm just referring to activities of daily living. All right, so let's just briefly talk about the income requirement. That's normally not an issue either. So for the income requirement, you have to essentially be spending more money on long-term care than you are bringing in each month. So technically, it's less than the Medicaid average daily rate for your care plus your monthly medical expenses. The Medicaid daily rate differs depending on the level of care, but for calculation purposes, for penalty periods and other things, which I'll reference in a minute, they talk about the average daily rate, which changes each year. Currently, it's $355. So when people will typically come in for a consultation with me, one of the biggest concerns, because a lot of people are getting this confused with Medicaid for people who are low income and under age 65, they are very, very concerned about their level of income. I meet with a lot of clients, and I can count on one hand how many times a person's income has actually negatively impacted them in terms of qualifying for Medicaid. Most of the people who come in to see me, their average income is typically anywhere between $800 and about $4,000. And as I mentioned earlier, average cost of care, you're looking at about $6,000. So typically, income is not going to be an issue because of how astronomically high long-term care is. All right, now the resource requirements, that is what is one of the harder things about Medicaid. So for the applicant, the person applying for it, they can have no more than $2,000 in non-exempt resources. I'll talk about exempt resources in a minute. But fairly recently, I was curious about when the last time this was increased, because I didn't remember an increase since I went to law school a number of years ago. And I was right in the fact that there has not been an increase in a very long time. Specifically, 1989 was the last time they increased it. So it's been at $2,000 since 1989. And obviously $2,000 now is worth a lot less than it was back in 1989. This fairly comports with what I've seen Medicaid doing, is really becoming a lot more strict in qualification, because more and more people are needing it. There's less and less money. It's tough. Now, for a married couple, when a married couple, or rather when someone applies, if they are married, the spouse's money and property is considered to be kind of not necessarily up for grabs, but it's counted in terms of eligibility. So a married couple is considered to be a unit. Now, the well spouse, so spouse who doesn't need Medicaid, can currently keep $59,890 in non-exempt resources. Now, luckily, this number does creep up a little bit each year. All right, so I've mentioned exempt resources a few times. And so those are resources not countable in the $2,000 resource limit, and $2,000 / 60,000 resource limit. So you can have a home as long as it's worth less than $636,000, or let me say that in a different way. So you can, your home is exempt if your equity interest in it is worth less than $636,000. Now, there's a little bit of a loophole for this. And let's say you're married and your spouse, your spouse is the one who needs Medicaid, and they're going into a facility, but you're perfectly healthy and you want to stay at home. As long as that spouse is healthy and staying at home, there's no cap to the value of the home. So you won't have to downsize or sell the home if one spouse is still living in it. If you are single or both spouses are in a facility, then the equity interest is has to be less than $636,000. The reason I'm focusing on equity interest is because let's say you had listed your kids on as being co-owners, 10 years ago, and let's say they are 50% co-owners of that, then your equity interest is 50% of the house, or 50% of the value. So let's say the house was worth $1 million. You and your kids own it equally, and so your equity interest in it would be $500,000. So in that scenario, the home is exempt. And I know nowadays with the crazy housing market, $636,000 is not very much anymore. Other resources not counted towards the $2,000 limit: household goods and personal effects, durable medical equipment, pretty much tangible things. You can have one car of unlimited value. Medicaid doesn't care how much it is worth as long as it's used for transportation. You can have a life insurance policy, but the cash surrender value has to be less than $1,500. These are virtually unheard of. And I remember a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, I had done a presentation in front of some financial planners, and I got a few laughs when I gave this number, because pretty much none of them had ever issued a policy that with a cash surrender value for that little. Now, there's a distinction between the cash surrender value and the death benefit, or the death payout of it. So life insurance, some life insurance policies can be sold for an amount that is less than the death payout. So that's what Medicaid is concerned about, the cash surrender value. Now, most prepaid funeral arrangements are considered an exempt resource. You can also have a burial fund of less than $1,500 per person. So everything else is countable. That can include these, the well spouse's $200,000 IRA. That is countable. That catches a lot of people off guard. So everything really is counted, unfortunately. Now, to make this a little bit trickier, there is a 5-year look back. So that means that when you apply for Medicaid, DSHS, who administers Medicaid, will look back 5 years to see if you gave away any money or property. And if you did, it will result in a period of ineligibility unless a very few exceptions apply. So, for example, let's say that you gift $100,000 within 5 years. It will result in 282 days of ineligibility. So you divide the size of the gift by the Medicaid average daily rate. So $100,000 divided by 355 gives you 282. So with the ineligibility period, it begins when you are what's called otherwise eligible. So that means you meet all other eligibility requirements. Quite harshly, unfortunately, that means that the applicant themselves has to be down to $2,000 in the bank. Now, Medicaid does this intentionally to discourage people from essentially giving away all of their money in order to qualify for Medicaid. Now, there are some very limited exceptions. You can do gifting specifically of your home to a spouse or disabled child. No gifting penalty with that. You can also gift your home to a caregiver child. Now, that sounds nice in theory, but in practice, it is almost impossible to actually make that happen for the caregiver child. And the reason is that you have to transition immediately from being at home with the caregiver child to going on to Medicaid. And sorry, I'm just going to flip really quick. I want to see where we are. Okay, so yeah. Part of the reason I was doing that is I wanted to see if I had an extra slide on what I want to talk about. So let's talk about Medicaid and facilities. So I mentioned at the start that most facilities have a private pay requirement of anywhere between 1 and 4 years. And so Medicaid has terrible reimbursement rates to these facilities. And that means that the facilities who do accept Medicaid will end up losing money. And it's gotten worse, especially with COVID, unfortunately, that facilities who accept Medicaid do lose money. And so more of them are stopping accepting Medicaid. So you want to do the planning early, and you want to be sure that you are setting enough money aside to pay for your care for at least 2 years. And I'm emphasizing in a facility, and I'm sure there might be some people on this in attendance today who say, oh, I never want to go into a facility. Very, very reasonable. That's not always possible, unfortunately, unless you have a lot of money. So Medicaid very specifically will not pay for 24-hour home care. They'll pay for a little bit of home care, but the number of hours that are awarded are never enough money to actually, or excuse me, never enough time to pay for the amount of care and provide the amount of care that the person actually needs. I remember quite vividly, I had just been practicing a few years and had a client whose mom really, really wanted to stay at home. Mom was getting round the clock care, and I think she was paying $10,000 out of pocket, and she ran out of money. And so we applied for Medicaid for her. DSHS, if I remember correctly, only awarded 36 hours per week. This was a day and a half of care for someone who needed round the clock care. And unfortunately, my client was forced to take her mom out of the home where she really wanted to be and put her into the first long-term care facility that that would take her. So that particular example sticks out in my mind as a reason why you really want to be sure that you're not spending all of your money on home care. So be sure you're being conservative in spending your money, especially if it's going to look like you will end up needing Medicaid in the future. That all being said, if you have, $1 million+ in assets in addition to your home, you can pay for 24-hour care for many, many years in your home. You can do whatever you choose. For people who have substantially less than that, though, you want to be really, really careful that the same thing doesn't happen. As I mentioned earlier, you don't want to be in crisis mode. You want to be sure that you are getting to choose what facility you go to and not having to go to the first one that has an opening. All right, now let's talk about estate recovery, another not too nice component of Medicaid. So when you're on Medicaid, and this is for people who receive Medicaid for long-term care when they are age 55 and older, Washington State can reimburse itself for paying for long-term care. And so that means that when you pass away, they will place a lien on any assets that you owned at the time you passed away. So for most people, let's say you're single and you own a home, and that's really the only asset that you have at the time you pass away, Medicaid will go in and place a lien on the home. So just want to be aware of that. Now, if you are married and let's say you and your spouse own a home together, then you can, Medicaid will not take, I was about to say possession, they will not place a lien until the second spouse has passed away. So just be aware of that. Okay. So yeah, this is essentially what I said. So for the recipient, all of their separate property, so all of property owned in their name, 1/2 of the community property. For the spouse, the surviving spouse, no portion of their property can get a lien placed unless that spouse that later needs to go on to Medicaid. And recovery is only allowed after both spouses have passed away. And I forget if I mentioned this in another slide, but a really, really common planning method to take advantage of the gifting exception for spouses is, let's say both spouses are on the home, only one spouse needs Medicaid. You can go in and you can take the applicant spouse's name off of the home. That all of a sudden becomes the well spouse's separate property, and Medicaid can't place a lien on it. So that is an easy, effective way to kind of keep Medicaid from getting their hands on too much. Now let's transition into aid and attendance. Now this is for veterans and their spouses. This is a stipend that the VA will issue when someone meets certain eligibility requirements. So it's a limited stipend for married vets, and these are all current amounts. For a married vet, they can receive a total of $2,431 per month. Single vets can receive $2,050 per month. A surviving spouse can receive $1,318 per month. The stipend is increased by the percent the vet is disabled. So an example I've seen a few times is Korean War vets. I think there was a lot of shelling, a lot of really loud shelling, and maybe not great ear protection. I've seen a number of vets who were 10% disabled due to hearing loss. So that means that the stipend would be decreased by 10% in that example. Now, the eligibility requirements, the person needs to need assistance with at least 2 activities of daily living. As a reminder, bathing, using the restroom, walking, transferring, eating, things like that. The veteran needs to have served at least 1 day during wartime. We'll talk about the wartime periods in a minute. They cannot have been dishonorably discharged. So there's a tiny bit of I have typed that out in kind of an awkward way intentionally. I'm not saying honorably discharged. They can't have been dishonorably discharged. Back in the day, some vets were dishonorably discharged for coming out as gay. Those dishonorable discharges were later voided. I'm not sure they were changed to honorable, but they were changed to not dishonorable. So that would be a situation where something like that would apply. Now, the surviving spouse can apply for benefits, but they cannot have had any remarriage. So, if their veteran spouse passed away, they remarried a few years later, they can't use that deceased spouse's VA benefits. Now, a few times I've seen a person will, their spouse will pass away who's a vet, they marry another vet. Now they can definitely use that vet's benefits at that point. Okay, wartime periods, kind of the big ones. So World War II, obviously we're not getting too many of those. There are still some surviving spouses out there who maybe the spouse was really young when they got married. So there's still some of those. There's a Korean War, 1950 to 1955. Vietnam is a little funny. So the total Vietnam conflict was 1961 to 1975. However, with the exception of a few years in early Vietnam, you do not have to actually have served in country. So you could have been stationed at JBLM the entire course of your active duty service and still apply and still get qualified, with the exception of that 1961 to mid 1964. During that time, the rules are that you had to have been in country or in contiguous waters, so in the Navy, basically, in the waters around Vietnam. Otherwise, it's for all others, assuming you were not in country, mid 1964 to 1975. Persian Gulf, I actually need to double check on this to see if they have finally assigned an end date. As of last year, they had not assigned an end date to the Persian Gulf War. So the entire 30-year war period. So that won't really apply to many people applying now, but just to give you that information. Okay, so here are some more eligibility requirements regarding aid and attendance. You can have a maximum of $138,400 $489. I have no idea how they calculated that. That includes yearly income. So let's make the numbers really easy. Let's say that your yearly income is $38,489. You can then have $100,000 in additional resources. Now there are some the exempt resources not countable are the same as Medicaid. No limit to the home value, but there is a limit to the lot size, which I had to make this distinction for a client fairly recently. So for Medicaid, they place a limit on the home value. They don't care about the lot size. VA, it's a little bit different. VA cares about the lot size. You can have no more than 2.2 acres. It can be worth $10 million as far as they're concerned, but it can't be more than 2.2 acres. Whereas with Medicaid, you can have a 10-acre piece of property as long as it's not worth under, or as long as it's the equity interest is not over $636,000. Now, there is a penalty period similar to Medicaid, but the penalty period is within 3 years of application. I don't know if there's anyone on the attending the presentation today, but that might sound a little unfamiliar, the gifting, the penalty period. And if it does, it's because that's only been around for a few years. It got implemented in October of 2018. Before that, there was actually some fairly decent planning you could do because there was not a penalty period. But VA also is cracking down on trying to limit eligibility. And let's see. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about aid and attendance, and then we'll talk about some planning techniques. Okay, so with VA benefits, and this applies for all VA benefits, not just aid and attendance. I highly suggest that you get assistance in doing any VA application. VA applications are notoriously difficult. I did them for a few years. I stopped, and part of the reason I stopped is because anyone who assists with someone with applying cannot take a fee for that. So once again, getting up on my soapbox just a little bit, I think they do that to deter people from applying and deter, like, lawyers, for instance, from assisting because we don't get compensated for it. So VA applications are notoriously difficult. You really want to get assistance because even more so than Medicaid. Medicaid can be a little tricky. Medicaid's not too bad though. VA, the forms are really confusing, even to me. I remember having to look a lot of things up when I was doing them. So if they're confusing to me, they're going to be confusing to someone who does not have training in this. The forms change all the time. So you can get assistance from veteran service organizations, VFW in Fife, and I think there's one in Tacoma that also does it, but there's not too many of them. So no one can charge you for assisting you in applying for VA benefits. And please don't call the actual VA to try to get help. They routinely give people very bad information, and they don't always understand the different different programs. So just use caution with that. Please get assistance, but not from the VA with the application. All right, off of my soapbox. So how do you actually plan for this? There's a few different ways. So you can do traditional spend down. That's what it sounds like. So spending down your money until you are eligible. So you can spend it on healthcare, home improvements, upgrading your car, purchasing durable medical equipment, purchasing prepaid irrevocable funeral arrangements. Most prepaid arrangements are irrevocable. And it's been my experience that most funeral homes are well aware of this Medicaid loophole. And so they're pretty good about providing those. When I'm meeting with clients, a lot of people will get confused about this technique because of gifting, because of the 5-year look back. So as long as you are spending the money on yourself or your spouse, Medicaid really doesn't care what you do with it. They do care if you are giving it to someone else. Okay, so you can spend it on yourself, you can spend it on your spouse. Don't spend it on someone else. Don't give it to someone else. Another issue that has come up for a few of my clients is, and normally I'm working with the family at this point, like through the durable power of attorney, is, mom or dad likes to take cash out to go to the casino or just, to have some general spending money. That's really hard for Medicaid to track. And so they'll be looking at all of your bank records essentially for the last 5 years. And when they see repeated withdrawals of, $500 or $1,000, they are going to ask about that. Anytime you submit a Medicaid application, you want to make it as easy for DSHS as possible. You don't want to raise any questions. Taking out cash raises questions because you can't easily track that. Another issue that comes up is, let's say mom needs Medicaid and son has been helping out around the house or doing yard work or something, and mom has been paying him. That's fine. That's not a gift, but be sure that that mom is writing him checks, and in the memo line, she's putting the reason that she's writing those checks to him. So you want to show that it's not a gift. All right, so other planning techniques. I touched on this a little bit earlier. You can transfer money and assets between spouses. So unlimited transfers and gifts allowed between spouses. And common planning technique, you transfer most of the community transfer all of the community property and most of the applicant's separate property to the well spouse, including the home, except for $2,000 in the bank. And at that point in time, you're wanting to split up the bank accounts too. And I actually want to hit pause very briefly because I know I am throwing so much information at you guys. What I'm wanting you to get from this is plan early. If you get a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, you want to go in and start to an elder law attorney like myself, and you want to start getting your ducks in a row, and you also want to get your estate planning done. Be very careful on gifting. That's the other thing I want you to get from it. And be sure you're holding enough money aside to pay for at least 2 to 3 years of private pay. So if you get nothing else from my presentation, I want you to get those main components. So going back to the spousal transfers, benefits of doing the spousal transfer: it's easier qualification for Medicaid, avoids the Medicaid lien on the home. The risk is that the well spouse may need assistance in the future. Even though that is a risk, it's not that big of a risk. You're essentially just out the cost of having a deed drafted and the recording fee. So big scheme of things, not that much. And it's a very useful planning technique. So, oh, and with the technique that I just mentioned, and with this one that I'm about to talk about, these are things that you don't want to really do until you are about to qualify for Medicaid. And the tough reason for that is sometimes the person who is likely to need Medicaid will pass away right before they need Medicaid. So you don't want to do this, 3-4 years in advance, because it's just extra work and it might not really provide any benefit either. So the spousal transfers and the Medicaid qualifying annuity, you want to do right before you apply for Medicaid. So one thing I did not mention earlier is that with the spouse who does not need Medicaid, DSHS doesn't care how much income they have. They care about the assets. They care about like money, but they don't care about how much in income they have. So I used the example of, potentially having to spend a spouse's $200,000 IRA. So let's assume that the spouse, or let's assume in that situation that the private pay requirement of the facility has already been overcome, and there's still that $200,000 IRA, but the well spouse, quite understandably, doesn't want to be impoverished. So you can take that $200,000 IRA and you convert it into a very specific kind of Medicaid qualifying annuity. The technical term for it is a SPIA, single premium immediate annuity. It is a very, very specific kind of annuity. If there's any financial planners out there, you'll know this is not great in terms of maintaining your assets or growing your assets. So really the only time it's used is to keep the well spouse from needing to spend all of their money. And a technical part of this is that when you apply for Medicaid, let's say you've done a Medicaid qualifying annuity. Realistically, the well spouse is, maybe they'll be able to save some of the extra money that they get in income. And so that would push them over the 59,000 and change. That's okay. So Medicaid will take a snapshot one time of the well spouse's assets. They don't care how many what assets the well spouse has after that. The reason that's important is because that means that, if you do that annuity, then you can reinvest it into something that will actually grow. However, for the applicant spouse, Medicaid will do a yearly snapshot just to be sure that they're not going over that $2,000. In order for the SPIA to qualify, it needs to be irrevocable and it needs to last for a term of 5 years, technically, or the life expectancy of the annuitant, of the spouse who is receiving it, if the life expectancy is shorter than 5 years. Normally it's not. Okay, this is an effective way to qualify for Medicaid while still receiving the benefit of the assets and not impoverishing the spouse. Okay, the final planning technique that I'll talk about, and I do these less and less now because Medicaid is really trying to crack down on any sort of trust whatsoever. So you can, at this point in time, still do a very specifically structured type of irrevocable trust. So in order for the trust to be appropriate and to be approved, the trustor, so the person who who ultimately ends up applying for Medicaid and whose assets they are, they must be able to private pay for at least 5 years to overcome the Medicaid look back and have a solid trusting relationship with the family. It is irrevocable. It is unable to be revoked or amended by the trustor for any reason whatsoever. This is treated like a safe where essentially, you shut the door, throw away the key. This can be great for clients who really, really want their family, their kids to inherit from them, because this will guarantee an inheritance. Now, it is considered a gift for Medicaid purposes. So that's why you need to be keeping enough money outside of the trust for at least 5 years. This has been very useful and effective, kind of in limited circumstances, but one that's come up quite a bit is, let's say there is a piece of real estate that has been passed down through generations of family. And in order to qualify for Medicaid, otherwise, the owner would end up having to sell the property, which would just break their heart. It would break everybody else's heart. So then you can create a trust and put that real estate in there. So that's one option. You can also gift the property too. That's another option. Now the trustor cannot be the beneficiary. As I mentioned, Medicaid has been really cracking down on trusts like this, and they've gotten a lot stricter. So if the trustor has any control whatsoever over the trust, the entire value that's in the trust is considered a countable resource. And so that means they have to spend it down. So risks and that the trustor runs out of money before 5 years. If that happens, the family members who would be the beneficiaries have to be willing to use the money for the trustor's benefit, because technically it's not the trustor's money anymore. So the family, the trustee, would dip in and pay the facility directly at that, or pay the facility directly from that. Another big issue are family disputes. This comes up more often than you might think, unfortunately. So let's say the kids don't end up getting along. So if they don't, then you're essentially going to have to unwind the trust. Early on in my practice, I was assisting another attorney with something like this, and I was coming on at that time as a trust protector, but in theory, I would have been able to help mediate things and still keep the trust intact. In actuality, I wasn't able to really do anything, and kids started fighting with mom and dad, and then they ended up having to go to court, spend thousands of dollars on attorney's fees to get this trust revoked, essentially. So in some situations, this can work well. A lot of times it really doesn't. So use a lot of caution. And if this is something you are ever interested in, be sure you are talking with an elder law attorney, not just a estate planning attorney who doesn't also do elder law, because they'll tell you to do the wrong trust. You have to work with an attorney who does both estate planning and elder law and knows Medicaid rules. Okay, I think that's it. Yep, those are all my slides. So I'm going to stop share, and then we can do questions. I know I've gone through so much, so you guys have done great.
Yes, thank you. A lot of really great information. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. That way, everybody can feel comfortable kind of unmuting and we can have a conversation without it, being out there. So thank you again, and I will stop the recording now.